The Cabinet Committee on Security meeting has ended, and at 11:30, the Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale will be addressing the media. Parikshit Luthra joins us for more on what's developing. Parikshit?
Well, an urgent press briefing has been called. We saw the Cabinet Committee on Security meeting early this morning. The Prime Minister chaired it. You had Rajnath Singh, you had Nirmala Sitharaman, you had Sushma Swaraj, also the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, Ajit Doval, the Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale was there as well. We are being told by our sources in the government that Vijay Gokhale has been deputed to brief on behalf of the government. So this is going to be a briefing on the counter-strike operation that has taken place in the early hours of morning. We saw an Indian Air Force team entering Pakistani territory, carrying out bombings on terror targets, on terror launch pads, training camps in Balakot in Pakistani territory. So this is a very, very significant move. The Pakistani side, of course, downplaying it. But we're going to get the first official word on this IAF mission in Pakistan in the Balakot sector in about 15 minutes from now.
Okay, in 15 minutes, we will have more clarity. Parikshit, thank you very much for taking us through that. And we'll have Parikshit back with more. We've got some perspective coming in now from someone who's seen the markets over a very long period of time and who'd be able to give us a sense in terms of how to think about this. I mean, the cross-border sort of strike which has happened and just how to put this in perspective. Adrian Movat is emerging equity market strategist. And he's a veteran, really. Adrian, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. I trust you heard my colleague Parikshit. I don't know if you've been seeing the news, but the Indian Air Force has struck across the line of control in Pakistan on terror groups. That's what we're picking up. We'll get an official briefing from the Indian Foreign Secretary in about 15-20 minutes from now. First up, what do you make of it? I mean, what should the markets make of it, if anything at all?
Yes, I don't think the markets should react too strongly to this. We've had geopolitical tensions between Pakistan and India ever since partition. These tensions rise on occasions, but their medium-term impact on the capital markets tends to be very modest. So I think a little bit of instability on a very short-term basis, but I don't think it should really change your investment thesis around India.
Adrian, morning. How do the foreign investors generally react in the near term when we have such kind of a news flow?
Well, I think a little bit more cautious, but nothing beyond that. I think the long-term India watchers have seen a whole series of incidents between India and Pakistan, and they have not had an effect on the earnings that ultimately drive the share price of the companies. So I think the experienced watchers of India will take this in their stride, and the market impact will be relatively modest.
Not if it escalates. We don't know. You know, we had a colleague from our sister news channel interviewed a serving sort of army officer who actually led the first surgical strike, after the last big terror attack. And his point was, and he essentially said that the comments coming in from the Pakistani side at this point, he said he's not sure what to make of it. Are they trying to downplay it? If they're trying to downplay it and saying, well, nothing happened, that's good news. But you never know. So the risk of escalation is there, Adrian, right? Well,
clearly, if things get worse, then it will have an impact on the markets. There's sort of a truism there. There was a period of time where Delhi looked at its options and then has responded. Presumably, you'll have the same considerations going on in Islamabad. It may be a period of time before we know whether this does escalate or whether you have this strike and there's no response from the Pakistanis of significance in terms of adding to the geopolitical tension. So let's wait and see. But I do go back to, we've had incidents in the past and their impact on the market has been pretty modest on a medium-term view. And that's why I think international investors tend to look through these.
Adrian, I'm getting into hypothetical waters now, but if we get a first sign of retaliation or an escalation in the tensions and geopolitical tensions, then what should India market watcher do?
So, escalation implicitly is a deterioration. I think for the international investor, if you're running a global emerging market fund, you've had India underperforming year to date. You've had strong performance out of markets like Brazil, Indonesia, China. If trade tensions between China and the United States are confirmed as easing with a deal, then I think you'll continue to see this rally in the Chinese equity market. I also think Korea and Taiwan will do well. And if that's the case, then the international investor, which came into the year overweight India, will probably continue to reallocate capital. And if there's a geopolitical issue going on in India that's making the near-term outlook less certain, then there's perhaps an additional push to take money out of India, combined with the pull to go after the markets that performed very poorly last year and now have some better fundamental stories.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that if China continues to do well, capital gets reallocated. Capital goes to China, right? Maybe at the expense of other emerging markets as well. How likely is that a possibility? And is China really turning? That's the big question a lot of people want to know.
So I think it's very likely. I was just looking through data on the Global Emerging Market Fund positioning at the end of 2018. They were overweight markets such as India, very underweight Korea, Taiwan, and China. There is real pressure on the specialist emerging market manager to get money to work in China. The way that the market operates is the market thinks ahead a couple of quarters for the economy and about 12 months ahead in terms of earnings growth. This quarter, you will get very poor economic data reported on China, with maybe one notable exception, which is we're beginning to see the monetary data improve. So you have a clear indicator there that a more accommodative policy has been put in place in China. If you can combine that with a sentiment improvement around reduction in trade tensions, then I think you've got a powerful story for Chinese equities. Yes, they've rallied year to date, but remember that this was the worst performing market in 2018.
Adrian, you said at the start of the year, investors or portfolio managers were overweight India and very underweight China. How much of this reallocation between India and China has already taken place, and how much is left? Because we're talking about a near 20% underperformance since the start of the year of the Indian markets vis-a-vis the Chinese markets.
Yes, so I think a modest amount has happened. Much of the movement we've seen in capital markets has related to short covering as opposed to significant asset allocation. In terms of the details of how funds have reallocated, it takes time for that to come out. Remember that the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, where the bulk of MSCI China is listed, does not provide data on the type of investors buying on a day-to-day basis. You have to wait to see the end-of-month valuations, the end-of-month reports from these funds, which are, beginning to come out now, before you see how much they reallocated in January, and you don't have any information yet for February. But I'm looking at the aggregate data, the ETF data. I think there is some modest reallocation, but only that. If China continues to outperform, remember, it's not just a matter of covering your underweight. You really need to get overweight so you can be outperforming your benchmark.
All right. Adrian, so what's your view on the Indian stock market in isolation in that sense? Actually, before I come to that, let me just go back to the strikes and the impact, not on markets, but on politics, Adrian, because that indirectly should also have a big impact on markets. We're coming up, elections are coming up. This is a very emotive issue. We've had strikes now. What is the impact on politics? Because, as I said, elections are not far away at all.
Well, generally, when these types of incidents happen, it's usually good for the support for the government in power. And it doesn't really matter whether that government's in power in Delhi or Washington, D.C. or London. So this is probably good for the BJP government as people have a natural sense of loyalty to their government when this type of activity is going on.
And Adrian, just one final question on India then, as Prashant was asking. This news event aside, what is the market texture looking like now?
So I think India is still very much a sort of wait-and-see market. As you wait for the general election, there might be some modest moves in stocks due to individual dynamics. We continue to see a big divergence in performance, particularly in the financials. But as of now, it still looks like more of a defensive market with sectors like IT continuing to do well. And I suppose if we do get a reduction in trade tension and we get a sort of more mature view around visa allocation as part of that reduction in trade tension, then the Indian IT space should benefit from that. It's very difficult at this point to see a change in trend for the macro economy in India, which was okay last year and kind of looks okay for this year.
Okay, Adrian, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us and taking us through what you make of a whole host of things, starting, of course, with the strikes which we've seen this morning. Adrian Mover there, a long time emerging market equity watcher. The market is off the lows. I think we're off 75 points from yesterday's close, but off from the day's low. The day low, by the way, on the Nifty was 10,729, so actually quite a way off. We take a very quick break. The first on the show, we come back and we discuss what's happening in commodities and, of course, that big drop that we saw in the price of oil. Manisha is going to be joining in and she'll have a guest with her. Back in 2.